I still remember the sound of Mama's sigh that morning, long, tired, and heavy like rain clouds that never burst. The kind of sigh you hear when someone has held their world together for too long. It was the last Sunday before school reopened, and my sister Ndidi and I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, folding our faded uniforms. Mine was torn at the hem, hers had lost all its buttons except one. The blue had turned almost gray, and the white collars were more yellow than anything else. I tried not to look at Mama as she mended them with trembling hands. "Ma," Ndidi said softly, her voice hesitant, "can we get new clothes this term?" The needle in Mama's hand froze midair. Her shoulders stiffened. For a few seconds, she didn't move at all, just stared at the tiny tear she'd been stitching. Then, slowly, she placed the needle down and looked at us. In that moment, I saw it, the flicker of pain behind her eyes, the kind she tried to hide every day. "My girls," she began, forcing a small smile, "new clothes will come soon. Just not this month, okay?" "But Ma," Ndidi pressed, her innocent eyes wide. "Everyone laughs at me in school. They say I smell like smoke and old soap." I shot her a warning glance, not because she was wrong, but because I knew those words would crush Mama. And they did. Mama's lips quivered. She turned her face toward the window, pretending to fix the curtain. Outside, the narrow streets of Alexandra township buzzed with life, taxi horns blaring, vendors shouting over one another, children chasing tires down dusty alleys. In the distance, the skyline of Sandton shimmered with glass towers and promise. That was the cruel thing about living here. You could see wealth from your doorstep but never touch it. Mama whispered, "Finish your tea, my darlings. We'll be late for church." But I'd already seen the tears she tried to hide. The church bell rang from down the street, echoing through our corrugated walls. Mama wrapped her faded shawl around her shoulders and took our hands. We walked through the bustling township, past the smell of fried fetcook and the clatter of metal pots, until we reached the market square. That's when everything began. The market was full that day, vendors shouting prices and children darting between stalls. Mama stopped by a table selling second-hand clothes, carefully picking through a pile of shirts. I watched her fingers linger over a little yellow dress, bright, new-looking, with tiny flowers on the hem. "R60, the woman behind the stall said. Mama's hand froze. She looked at the dress again, then at us. "Can you give me for R40? She asked, her voice steady but humble. The woman shook her head. "R60, Mama. That one is almost new." I could see the struggle in Mama's eyes, pride wrestling with desperation. She opened her purse slowly, the same brown leather one she'd carried since I was a child. Inside was a single crumpled R50 note and a few coins. She sighed, placed the dress back, and whispered, "Thank you." Then, to my shock, her voice broke. Just slightly, but enough. "Mama," I whispered. She turned away quickly, pretending to adjust her shawl again. "It's nothing, my girl. The sun, it's too bright." But her shoulders were shaking. My heart clenched. That was the first time I saw Mama cry in public. As we walked home, a sleek black Range Rover slowed beside the road. Dust swirled around its shiny tires. The driver wore dark sunglasses, and beside him sat a man, tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a crisp white shirt. His wristwatch gleamed like something from a dream. He was looking straight at us. Mama pulled us closer to her side, lowering her gaze. "Come, girls," she whispered. "Keep walking." But Ndidi, curious as ever, kept staring. The man in the car turned slightly, his brows furrowed as if he were trying to remember something. His eyes lingered on Mama, then on me. He mouthed a word I couldn't hear. The car followed us for a few meters, then stopped. The door opened. "Mama, someone's coming," I whispered. Mama turned sharply. Her face went pale. The man stepped out, dusting his shoes, his eyes fixed on her. "Excuse me," he said in a deep, calm voice. "Sorry to bother you, madam." We all froze. No one called women from our township madam. He looked at Mama again. "Are you Nalwazi?" Mama's lips parted, but no sound came out. I saw her throat move as she swallowed. "Do I know you?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Perhaps not, but you remind me of someone I used to know a long time ago." He reached into his pocket and took out something, a folded handkerchief, white and neat. He held it out to her. Mama didn't move. "It fell," he said softly, pointing to the ground, though there was nothing there. "Please take it." Confused, Mama accepted it. The man nodded once, stepped back, and returned to his car. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared down the dusty road, leaving a trail of silence behind. Thandi giggled nervously. "He was weird," she said. But Mama didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the handkerchief. I glanced at it too. Embroidered in the corner, in tiny blue letters, were the initials LM. That evening, Mama didn't cook. She sat by the window, holding that handkerchief like it was made of glass. The light from the street lamps cast soft lines across her face. I wanted to ask her who the man was, but something stopped me. Her expression was far away, like she was seeing ghosts. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Some things," she said, "are better left buried." Thandi had already fallen asleep beside me, clutching the little rag doll Mama had sewn from old fabric. I lay awake, watching Mama through the dim light. She held that handkerchief to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The next morning, things changed. Mama woke us early, her eyes swollen but her movements brisk. "Dress up," she said. "We're going to the market again." "But Ma," I yawned, "you said no new clothes." "Not for clothes," she cut in. "I just need to find someone." Her voice had that same trembling edge as the day before, but this time it carried something else too, urgency. We walked back to the market. The same vendors were there, shouting the same prices, but the man with the car was nowhere in sight. Mama asked around quietly, describing him. Some shrugged, others hadn't seen him. After an hour, she gave up and sat on a wooden crate, exhausted. "Mama, who was he?" I asked gently. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. "He was nobody," she said too quickly. Then softer. "Maybe somebody I wronged, or someone who wronged me." She reached into her purse and pulled out the handkerchief again. For a moment, I thought she would throw it away, but she folded it carefully, pressed it to her lips, and tucked it back inside. That's when I knew, whatever story lay behind that man, it wasn't over. As the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, painting the sky gold and crimson, I watched Mama from the side of the road. She stood tall despite her worn clothes, her face glowing in the fading light. In that moment, she looked like both the poorest and the richest woman in Johannesburg, poor in things, rich in strength. I didn't know then that the man in the Range Rover would return. I didn't know he would change everything we thought we knew about our lives. But I remember the way he looked at Mama, with recognition, with guilt, and with something that looked a lot like love. And that's how the story really began, with a simple question from a child and a tear in a crowded market. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, painting our small room in gold and dust. I woke to the sound of Mama humming softly, but the tune was off, broken, like her heart had misplaced the rhythm. Thandi was still asleep, curled against the worn blanket, her little curls sticking up in every direction. I slipped quietly out of bed and went to the window. The street was waking up, children kicking balls along the uneven pavement, women balancing baskets of fruit on their heads, taxis swerving around potholes. But there at the corner was something unexpected. A black car, shiny and too clean for this part of the township, idled beside a stall selling fresh oranges. The driver sat perfectly still, hands folded. The man from yesterday, tall, white shirt, wristwatch catching the sun, was standing outside watching. I gasped softly. My hand shook. "Mama," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Look!" She froze mid-step, washing dishes at the small sink. Her head snapped toward the window. I saw her lips tighten, and for a moment, she looked younger than I'd ever seen her, like she had been carrying a secret for a lifetime. "Don't," she murmured, but her voice was too soft, too caught in fear. The car door opened, and he stepped out slowly, hands raised slightly in peace. He moved with a calm, deliberate grace that made him seem almost unreal against the chaos of the street, the dust, the shouting vendors, the children laughing and crying all at once. He stopped a few feet from our gate and called out gently, "Nalwazi." Mama stiffened, clutching the edge of the sink. Her knuckles were white. I didn't recognize the sound of her own name spoken like that, soft, deliberate, and edged with something she wasn't ready to confront. I'm sorry, he continued, his voice carrying over the clamor of the street. I didn't mean to frighten you yesterday. Mama didn't answer. She moved slowly toward the door, gripping it like it could shield her from the past. I followed silently, my heart hammering. Thandi rubbed her eyes and peeked through the doorway, sensing tension she couldn't yet understand. The man smiled faintly when he saw us, a sad, almost apologetic curve. I don't know if you remember me, he said, but my name is Wazim Batha. I used to know someone very dear to me. Mama froze mid-step, then backed into the house, her hand brushing the doorframe. Wazi, she whispered, a single word that trembled. Yes, he said softly, lowering his voice. Wazim Batha, I've been trying to find you for years. For a heartbeat, everything was still. The sounds of the township, the shouting, the honking, the children, faded into a low hum, like the world itself was holding its breath. Mama's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. I could see her pulse racing beneath the thin fabric of her blouse. Why now? She asked finally, her voice breaking. After all these years. He stepped closer, careful to respect the invisible line of pride she had drawn. Because I had to know you were safe, he said. And because, he paused, glancing at Thandi and me. Because I think I might have a connection to your daughters. I stopped breathing. The words didn't make sense, yet they struck a chord deep inside me, one that felt like it belonged to a story my mother had never told. Mama shook her head. You don't know them. You don't know us. Go! But he didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the handkerchief, the same white cloth from yesterday, folded neatly. He held it out, palm up. I need you to see this, he said softly. Please. Mama hesitated, her eyes darting between us and him. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, as though she were wrestling with invisible chains. Finally, trembling, she reached out and took it. I could see her fingers tighten around it, almost as if holding on to it would keep something from escaping. Memories, regrets, a life she had hidden from us. The handkerchief smelled faintly of lavender and leather, something delicate yet impossibly luxurious for the streets we walked every day. Where did you get this? She asked, voice low. He looked at her, pain etched across his face. It belonged to someone you loved, someone I lost a long time ago. And it found its way back to you. I wanted to ask questions, 1,000,000 of them, but Mama's gaze silenced me. There was fear there, yes, but more than that, a flicker of recognition, something almost forbidden, like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Wazim Batha, the man in front of us, lowered his head slightly. I don't want anything from you, he said, except permission to make amends, to help, in any way I can. Mama's face twisted, a storm of pride, disbelief, and something else I couldn't name. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, I can't. He nodded, as though he expected her answer, as though he had rehearsed it in his mind for years. I understand, he said softly, but you don't have to decide now. I'll be around. I promise I'm not going anywhere. He stepped back slowly, dust rising from the ground under his polished shoes, and then he got into the car. The engine roared to life, a low, commanding sound that seemed too powerful for the narrow street. Mama pressed the handkerchief to her chest, tears finally spilling over. I reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away gently, shaking her head. I don't know who he is, she said, her voice trembling. And I don't know what he wants. But I remember him. I remember a life I left behind. I didn't fully understand her words, but I felt the weight of them. The life she had left behind, whatever it was, had returned, bringing with it questions and dangers we weren't ready to face. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Thandi asked dozens of questions, but Mama deflected them all, too preoccupied with her thoughts. She moved around the small house with the handkerchief tucked in her blouse, like a talisman, like something alive that demanded respect. Later, I sat with her on the stoop, watching the sunset bleed across the skyline. Johannesburg's wealthy towers gleamed in the distance, a stark reminder of what we didn't have. "Mama," I said quietly, "do you think he can help us?" She didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the street, at the children running barefoot, at the dust curling in the fading light. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Help us, maybe. But some debts, some mistakes, cannot be repaid so easily." I realized then that this man, this mysterious Wazimbatha, was more than just a passerby. He was a reminder of a past my mother had fought to forget. And yet, for the first time, I also sensed possibility. Possibility that we could have more than this life of scraping by, of patched uniforms and borrowed shoes. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if the stranger knew more about us than even Mama did? That night, as we lay under the thin blanket, Ndidi whispered in her sleep, "I want new clothes, too, Ndidi." I didn't answer, but I held her hand tightly. I knew the world was about to change. I just didn't know how, or when. And deep in my chest, a quiet, stubborn hope began to take root. Because the man with the handkerchief wasn't just a visitor. He was the beginning of a story none of us had expected, and none of us could ignore. The morning light burned gold across the rooftops of Alexandra township, casting long shadows through the narrow alleys. I followed Mama quietly as she packed a small bag with the essentials, a few coins, our worn school uniforms, and of course the handkerchief folded neatly inside her blouse. "Where are we going?" I asked softly, trying not to startle her. Mama didn't answer at first. Her steps were measured, almost like she was walking on the edge of a memory she feared to touch. Finally, she said, "We're going to Sandton. I need to see someone." Sandton. The name alone made my chest tighten. To us, it was a world of glass towers, marble floors, and people who never walked the dusty streets we called home. And yet, today, Mama was taking us there, taking us closer to the man in the black car, the one with the handkerchief. The taxi ride was tense. Mama stared out the window, fingers tightening and loosening on the strap of her bag. Ndidi fidgeted beside me, whispering questions I couldn't answer. "Do you think he's rich?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity. I shrugged. "He looks like someone who is everything." Ndidi's eyes grew even wider. "Everything. Ndidi, do you think he can give us new clothes?" I didn't answer. Not yet. There was more at stake than clothes. I could feel it in Mama's silence, in the way she gripped the seat as we jostled over potholes and traffic. When we finally reached Sandton, the contrast hit me like a punch. The streets were wide and clean, lined with imported cars and manicured trees. High-rise buildings of steel and glass reflected the sun in a blinding glare. Children in expensive shoes walked hand-in-hand with nannies, while the smell of fresh coffee and pastries replaced the fried fetcook and dust of our township. Mama didn't seem impressed. She held her head high, shoulders squared, like the Sandton streets had no power over her. And yet, I could see the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. A recognition, a memory brushing against the surface. We walked into a quiet cafe, one tucked into the corner of a shiny plaza. It smelled of roasted coffee beans and polished wood, of money and quiet power. Mama motioned for us to sit at a table by the window. I caught a glimpse of the street outside and felt a pang of longing for home, for the simple chaos of our neighborhood, for the market, for the laughter that didn't cost anything. Then the bell above the door jingled. Wazi stepped in. He looked different here, sharper, more in control. His white shirt was pressed perfectly, and his shoes gleamed as though they had been polished by someone who polished only gold. He stopped when he saw us, then smiled softly. "Mama," he said, voice low, "thank you for coming." She didn't reply. She only nodded once, her hands clutching the handkerchief under the table. I watched them. Something unspoken passed between them, like a bridge stretching across decades of silence. I could see Mama's jaw tighten, as if she were holding back a storm, and I could see Wazi's eyes soften with an ache that didn't belong to this world. He gestured toward the chair opposite us. "May I?" Mama's lips parted, and then she shook her head just slightly, allowing him to sit. The tension in the room was thick, almost tangible. I squeezed Ndidi's hand, both of us silent, sensing that the air itself was holding its breath. Then, quietly, Mama spoke. "It's been many years." "Yes," Wazi said softly. "Too many." He pulled out a small envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Mama froze, staring at it. I couldn't help but glance. There was a name on the front in elegant handwriting, a name I didn't recognize, but that made Mama flinch. "What is this?" she asked, voice trembling. "It's proof," he said simply. "Proof that I tried to find you. That I never forgot." Mama's hands hovered over the envelope but didn't touch it. She looked at Loisy, then at us, then back at him again. I can't take it," she said. "You must," he replied gently. "I need you to understand. For your daughters. For me. For the truth." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "The truth," I whispered to myself. "What truth?" "The kind that changes everything." For a long moment, no one spoke. The cafe buzzed softly around us, oblivious to the quiet storm at our table. Then Mama exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the envelope as if it were a live thing. "I left because I had to," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "I had a life I could not carry with me, and a choice I made to protect everything." Loisy leaned forward, eyes glinting. "And did it work? Did leaving protect anyone?" Mama's lips tightened. She shook her head, barely perceptibly. "Some things can't be protected, Loisy. Some things catch up to you." I didn't know what to say. I only watched as her face softened, a small flicker of vulnerability showing through the armor she'd worn for decades. Then Loisy did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded photograph. He placed it gently in front of her. Mama's eyes widened. She leaned forward, trembling, and gasped softly. It was a picture of a little girl, bright-eyed, smiling, wearing a tiny hand-sewn dress that looked almost exactly like one Ndidi had now. Her lips quivered, and her eyes filled with tears. That's... "Yes," Loisy said quietly. "That's her. My daughter. Your daughter. Our daughter." I froze. My mouth went dry. I glanced at Ndidi, who stared at the photo, her small hand covering her mouth. Mama's hand shook as she reached toward the photograph, then pulled back, gripping the handkerchief instead. "No, it can't be. Ndidi," she whispered to me, a strange mix of fear and wonder in her voice. "Do you see? Do you understand what this means?" I nodded slowly, though my mind was racing. The man who had appeared yesterday, the handkerchief, the Sandton cafe, it was all connected. Somehow, all of it pointed to something I could barely grasp. Loisy leaned back, his gaze softening. "I don't want to take over. I just want to help. I want to make sure your daughters don't have to struggle like we did." Mama's eyes glistened with tears. She looked down at us, then at Loisy, then back at the photograph. And for the first time in my life, I saw her fear and hope collide in a single, fragile moment. The cafe's warm light fell across her face, highlighting the lines of age and endurance, the pride and pain of a lifetime. I realized then that this man, the stranger with the handkerchief, with the perfect shoes and sharp suit, had entered our lives to shake it, to test it, and maybe to redeem it. Mama exhaled slowly, and for the first time she didn't look away. We will talk," she said softly. "All of us. But not here. Not yet." Loisy nodded. "Of course." As we left the cafe and walked back into the streets of Sandton, the setting sun reflected off the skyscrapers, painting them gold. I glanced at Mama. Her face was calm, but I could see the storm behind her eyes. And I knew without a doubt that nothing in our lives would ever be the same again. Because the secrets buried in Sandton were beginning to surface, and they were coming for all of us. The morning sunlight had barely warmed the township when Mama woke us. I could see the tension in her movements. Her hands were trembling slightly as she tied her headscarf. Ndidi, still half asleep, rubbed her eyes and mumbled, "Why are we up so early again, Ndidi?" I shrugged silently. I didn't know either. But the air in the house felt different, heavier, almost electric, as if the past had come calling and we were about to answer. Mama didn't speak as we walked to the small stoop outside our home. She only held the handkerchief in her palm, folding it and unfolding it like it contained all the answers to a question we hadn't even asked yet. "Ndidi," she said suddenly, voice low and firm, "I think it's time I tell you some things. Some things about the life I had before you and Ndidi were born." My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to protest. Part of me wanted to sit quietly and listen. Part of me wanted to demand she tell everything right now. I need you to understand, she continued, eyes scanning the street, the children playing, the vendors shouting, the smoke from frying food curling into the sky. Because what happened then, it shapes everything we live with now. We sat on the edge of the stoop, Mama holding the handkerchief between her fingers like it was fragile glass. Her gaze was distant, lost in memories that felt older than time itself. I was 19, she began softly, voice trembling. Young, foolish, full of dreams and stubborn pride. I met someone, a man, Lwazi. We were in love. I thought we would have forever. But life had other plans. I felt Thandi's small hand brush against mine. I gripped it gently, a silent promise that we were listening, that we would carry her story without judgment. He wasn't like anyone I had known, Mama continued. Smart, ambitious, and one day he was gone. I never knew why. Letters stopped coming, calls stopped coming, and then nothing. Just emptiness. I left everything behind because I thought it was safer that way, for me, for the child I carried, for the future I wanted for you too. I swallowed hard. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken regret. I had never known Mama to speak of love or loss in this way. Her hands, always so steady, trembled as she clutched the handkerchief tighter. Why now? I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Why is he here now? Mama looked at me then, really looked at me, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. Because, she said, he's found us. And because the choices we make, the ones we think are private, eventually find a way to catch up. I could feel Thandi fidgeting beside me, her curiosity bubbling over. Mama, is he our family? She asked hesitantly. Mama's lips pressed into a thin line. She shook her head slowly. Not yet. But one day, you will understand. Some connections are hidden until the right time. I glanced at the handkerchief again. Something about it seemed alive, as though it carried a pulse that only Mama could feel. I realized then that it wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a bridge between past and present, between secrets and truths that had been buried for years. The man, Lwazi, I asked carefully. He didn't just appear yesterday. He knew something about you, about us, right? Mama's eyes darkened. Yes, she admitted. He knows more than I'm ready to say. And that scares me more than anything. I leaned back, letting the heat of the sun wash over me. The township around us hummed with life, indifferent to the silent storm unfolding on our stoop. Children ran past, laughing, their bare feet kicking up dust. A vendor shouted about fresh oranges, and somewhere in the distance, a taxi horn honked. Life went on, oblivious to our secrets. That afternoon, I watched Mama prepare lunch with a strange mix of purpose and distraction. She hummed again, but this time the melody was sad, almost haunted. Her movements were precise, but her mind seemed elsewhere, hovering in a past we could only glimpse through fleeting expressions and tight lips. I took a chance. Mama, tell me more about him, I said softly. About your life back then. About Lwazi. Her eyes met mine for a long, tense moment. I thought she might refuse, but then something shifted. She gestured for us to sit closer. All right, she whispered. But you must promise me what I tell you stays here. Between us. You cannot tell Thandi, not yet. I nodded solemnly. Thandi, sensing the gravity, had gone to the window, pretending to watch the street, but clearly eavesdropping silently. Mama took a deep breath. Before you two were born, I lived in Sandton. I had a small job at a textile shop, and I thought I was making something of myself. I met him, Lwazi, at a charity event. He was polite, charming, kind, and I fell for him hard. But his family, his wealth, it wasn't just money. It was a world I could never belong to. She paused, her eyes glistening. I loved him, but I knew I couldn't survive there. I couldn't survive being seen as someone from nothing. And when I found out I was pregnant, I made a choice. I left. I came here, to Alexandra, to start again. And I told myself it was the only way to protect you, to protect my pride, to protect what little dignity I had left. I felt a lump in my throat. The woman who had raised us with endless patience and quiet strength had carried the secret all her life. Every hardship, Every missing opportunity, every long night of mending torn uniforms, it had been shaped by this decision, this sacrifice. But now he's here, I said carefully. And he knows. And he wants to help. Mama's gaze dropped to the handkerchief again. Yes. And that terrifies me more than leaving ever did. Because help can come with strings. And strings can bind you in ways you never expected. The rest of the day passed in an uneasy silence. Thandi asked a few innocent questions about the past, but Mama deflected them with quiet authority. I watched her, feeling both awe and sadness. She had carried so much alone, and now the past she tried to bury was reaching out to reclaim its place in our lives. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the township, painting the rooftops in gold and crimson, Mama finally spoke again. "Ndidi," she said softly, taking my hand, "you must promise me something. No matter what happens, no matter what he offers, we do not forget who we are. We do not forget where we come from. And we do not let pride or fear rule our hearts." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I promise, Mama." Thandi, listening from her bed, muttered sleepily, "I promise too." Mama smiled faintly, but her eyes remained distant. I could see the weight of her past pressing down on her, the choices she had made, and the secrets she had carried for decades. And I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Lwazi's intentions, whatever doors his presence opened, our lives were about to change forever. Because secrets buried in Sandton have a way of rising to the surface. And when they do, there is no turning back. The morning sunlight crept slowly into our tiny kitchen, dust motes dancing in golden shafts of light. Mama was already awake, sitting at the small wooden table, her eyes fixed on the handkerchief she had folded and refolded countless times. Thandi and I tiptoed in, not wanting to disturb her ritual, yet drawn by the quiet intensity that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Mama," I said softly, "what is it about that handkerchief? Why do you clutch it like it's alive?" She looked up, her eyes weary but firm. "It's not just a handkerchief, Ndidi. It's a reminder, a connection, something from a life I left behind, something I wasn't sure I would ever face again." Thandi peered over my shoulder. "A connection to him?" Mama's lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at it again, tracing the embroidered initials, LM, with her fingertips. The letters were small, neat, precise, but to her, they carried the weight of decades. "I have to tell you both something," she said slowly, almost whispering to herself. "Something I should have told you long ago. This handkerchief, it carries more than memories. It carries truth, and truth can't be ignored forever." I leaned in closer, curiosity mingled with apprehension. "What kind of truth, Mama?" She took a deep breath, eyes never leaving the cloth. "When Lwazi left all those years ago, he left behind evidence of a life he never told me about. Something I wasn't supposed to know. And now it's here." She carefully unfolded the handkerchief. At first, it seemed like any ordinary cloth, white, faintly perfumed with lavender, the edges frayed ever so slightly. But when she held it up to the sunlight, I saw it, a faint watermark in the corner, almost invisible, like a shadow hidden beneath the fabric. I squinted. "Mama, what is that?" She traced the watermark with her fingertip, eyes glistening. "Our family name. Not ours now, but his. Mbatha." I froze. Thandi gasped beside me. "Our family name? But how?" Mama sighed deeply, folding the handkerchief back into a tight square. "It's a reminder that some secrets are buried in the smallest things. And sometimes those small things hold the key to everything." I could see the weight of years pressing on her. Her hands shook slightly, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. "Mama, does this mean he's related to us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes met mine, full of pain, pride, and hesitation. "I don't know yet, Ndidi, and that is why we must be careful. Some truths can be dangerous when revealed too soon." The rest of the day was a blur of tension and curiosity. Every time I looked at Mama, she held that handkerchief like a shield, a talisman, a fragile thread tying her to a past she had desperately tried to forget. Thandi kept asking questions, and I answered as best as I could, though my own curiosity burned brighter than hers. By late afternoon, Mama led us outside, across the sun-baked alleyways, toward the small market where our lives had once intersected with Lwazi. She moved with purpose, yet there was a hesitation in her steps, a quiet war between fear and necessity. The market was busy as usual, vendors shouting prices, children chasing each other, taxi drivers honking over the narrow lanes. But today, I felt a strange electricity in the air, as if the handkerchief had called something out from the shadows. Mama stopped in front of a stall selling trinkets and small household items. She reached into her bag and pulled out the handkerchief again, smoothing it carefully over the top of a basket. Then, with a delicate hand, she unfolded it fully and revealed something hidden inside. A small folded note, yellowed with age. I gasped. Thandi leaned closer, eyes wide. Mama picked up the note carefully, as though it could crumble at any moment. "This," she whispered, "is from the day he left. It's a piece of his life I never touched. Until now." The note was simple, written in neat, elegant handwriting. "If ever you or your daughters need me, follow the signs. I have always watched over you, even from afar. LM." I felt my heart race. My mind spun with questions. Signs? What signs? "Mama, what does this mean?" She looked at me, her eyes deep and haunted. "It means he has never forgotten. It means that no matter how far we ran, no matter how much we hid, he has always been part of our lives. And now he is close." Thandi whispered, barely audible, "Does this mean he can help us?" Mama didn't answer immediately. She only held the note, pressing it to her chest. Then she looked at us, her eyes fierce with a mixture of fear and determination. "Help can come," she said finally, "but it comes with choices, Ndidi. Choices that will change everything." That evening, I sat on the stoop, watching the sun dip behind the Alexandra skyline, casting the township in shades of gold and orange. Mama was inside, the handkerchief and note tucked safely in her blouse. I couldn't stop thinking about Lwazi, the man in the Range Rover, the stranger with perfect shoes and a presence that seemed to command both respect and fear. "What if he's dangerous?" Thandi asked, her voice small as she sat beside me. I shook my head. "I don't think so. I think he wants to help. But Mama is right. Choices can be dangerous. And some secrets, some truths can hurt more than they heal." I looked at the handkerchief again, imagining it in my hands. Something about it felt alive, as though it held not just words but intentions, histories, and promises. I realized then that our lives were now intertwined with Lwazi's, whether we liked it or not. The night fell slowly, wrapping the township in quiet shadows. And as I lay in bed, listening to the distant sounds of vendors closing up and children's laughter fading, I knew this. The handkerchief was more than a clue. It was the beginning of a story we couldn't escape, a story that would challenge everything we thought we knew about family, loyalty, and love. And somehow, I sensed that the next step, the one that would truly reveal the secret in the handkerchief, was already waiting for us. The next morning, the air in Alexandra felt unusually crisp, carrying a strange mix of dust and promise. Mama was quiet, more reserved than usual, as if the handkerchief and the note had tethered her mind to invisible threads stretching far into the past. Thandi and I moved cautiously around the small house, speaking in whispers, as though the walls themselves could overhear. Something had shifted overnight, a tension, a vibration, like a current under the floorboards, something that demanded our attention. I couldn't help but glance at Mama. She was kneeling on the floor, unpacking a small box she hadn't opened in years. It was lined with faded velvet, the kind that had once held jewelry, letters, and small mementos of a life she had tried to leave behind. "Mama," I asked softly, "what's in there?" She looked up briefly, her eyes sharp, yet veiled with caution. "Things I thought were gone," she murmured. "Things I buried, thinking they would never matter again." Thandi, ever curious, edged closer. "Can we see?" Mama hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "Not yet. Some things must wait until you are ready, until your hearts are ready to carry the truth." I watched her carefully, heart pounding. There was a rhythm to her movements, precise and almost ritualistic, as if handling each object could awaken memories too heavy to bear. Then, slowly, she pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, the edges frayed, the spine cracked. She held it to her chest like a sacred relic. "This belonged to him, she whispered. Tulwazi. It contains clues. Clues to a life I thought I'd left behind. I leaned in, curiosity burning. Clues? About what? Her eyes met mine, haunted and unwavering. About us. About our family. About choices that were made before you were born. Thandi's eyes widened. Mama, can we see it? Mama shook her head, but then, almost imperceptibly, she slid it toward me. Just a glimpse, she said. But be careful. Curiosity can be dangerous. I opened the notebook slowly, the pages crackling under my fingertips. There were names, dates, and locations scribbled in neat, precise handwriting. Some were familiar, names from our neighborhood, names from the stories Mama sometimes told. Others were strange, foreign, places I had never heard of. And then I found it, a small, folded map tucked between the pages. It was delicate, almost fragile, but there it was, a path traced in tiny dotted lines, connecting unknown houses and streets, leading finally to a single location in Sandton. Mama, I whispered, showing her the map. Do you see this? Is this where he's been all these years? Her lips tightened. Yes, she said softly. And no, he hasn't just been here, he's been watching, protecting, waiting. Every step of our lives has been influenced by him in ways I never fully understood. Thandi's small hand reached for the map. He knows us. Mama's eyes darkened. Yes, but that knowledge comes with its own shadows. And shadows can hide truths you're not ready to face. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of quiet investigation. I traced the dotted line with my finger, imagining the streets, the houses, the footsteps that had once crossed this path. I could almost see Lwazi moving in the shadows, careful and deliberate, always near but never revealed. Mama, I asked hesitantly, why didn't he tell us sooner? She sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. Because, Ndidi, pride is a dangerous thing. And sometimes, people think hiding the truth protects the ones they love. But it often does the opposite. It leaves gaps. Gaps that grow wider every year until they can't be ignored. I nodded slowly, understanding more than I wanted to admit. And now he's here. So we have to follow the clues. Mama didn't answer immediately. She only looked at us, her expression a mixture of caution, fear, and fragile hope. Yes, but carefully. Every step must be measured, every choice deliberate. The shadows are not just places. They are warnings. By afternoon, I couldn't resist any longer. Thandi and I snuck out, clutching the notebook and map, our hearts racing. The streets of Alexandra felt different, alive with possibility, with danger, with secrets just waiting to be uncovered. We followed the dotted lines as best we could, weaving through alleys, past market stalls, past children playing under the sun, past vendors shouting over the noise. Every turn, every corner, felt charged, as if the map itself pulsed with the heartbeat of the past. Then, finally, we reached a small courtyard tucked behind an unassuming gate. The walls were high, painted in soft white, with flowers climbing toward the sky. It was beautiful and quiet, almost impossibly serene, a stark contrast to the chaos of the township we had left behind. And there, sitting on a bench, was a figure we recognized immediately. Lwazi. He looked up as we approached, his expression calm but unreadable. I wondered how long it would take you two to find this place, he said softly. Thandi froze, her eyes wide. He knows us. I stepped forward cautiously, clutching the map. Why did you hide all of this? I asked, voice trembling. Why didn't you come sooner? Lwazi's gaze softened, filled with a mix of regret and affection. Because some truths must be earned, Ndidi. Because people must be ready to carry them. And you are finally ready. He gestured toward the handkerchief tucked in Mama's blouse. That handkerchief, that small, simple cloth, carries more than memories. It carries the first clue to everything I wanted you to know. But clues alone are meaningless without understanding. Thandi's small voice trembled. Understanding about what? Lwazi leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a secret he hadn't yet revealed. About family, about love, about choices that can shape generations, about a past that connects us all. I felt my chest tighten. The shadows we had been chasing, the secrets, the clues, the handkerchief, were real, alive, and demanding attention. I realized then that we were standing on the threshold of revelations that could change everything. Who we were, where we came from, and who we would become. And I knew without a doubt that the next step would not be easy. The clues in the shadows were only the beginning. Because shadows, I had learned, were never empty. They carried whispers of the past, warnings for the present, and promises for the future. And if we wanted the truth, we had to follow them, no matter the cost. The morning air in Alexandra was heavy with anticipation. The sun climbed slowly, casting long shadows between the alleyways and tin-roofed houses. I could feel the tension in every step Mama took as she led Thandi and me toward the small courtyard in Sandton where we had met Lwazi before. The handkerchief lay tucked securely in her blouse, but I could see it pulsing with unspoken weight. "Mama," I whispered, "do you think today he'll tell us everything?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes distant. "I don't know, Ndidi, but we must be ready. The truth can be cruel." Thandi, clutching my hand, stayed silent. Even at her age, she sensed that something monumental was about to happen. When we reached the courtyard, it was quieter than before. Flowers climbed higher on the white walls, their colors vibrant against the polished stones. The sunlight fell in sharp diagonal beams, illuminating the small bench where Lwazi sat waiting. He looked different today, more open, softer, yet still commanding in presence. "Mama, Ndidi, Thandi," he said, voice calm, carrying a depth of emotion I could barely understand. "Thank you for coming. I have something you need to see, something that explains everything." Mama's hand trembled as she clutched the handkerchief tighter. "Lwazi, I don't know if I'm ready," she said, voice barely audible. He rose slowly, careful to respect her space. "You have been ready for years," he said gently. "You just didn't know it." He held out a small box, the same elegant velvet-lined box Mama had kept hidden in our home. He placed it on the bench between us and opened it. Inside were photographs, faded, yellowed, each telling a story that had been kept secret for decades. Mama gasped, her fingers hovering over the first photo. It was of her younger self, smiling, standing next to Lwazi, both dressed in fine clothes, in front of a building I recognized from the Sandton map. I felt my breath catch. "That's Mama," I whispered. "Yes," Mama said softly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That was long ago, before everything changed." Lwazi picked up another photo, this one of a baby, swaddled in a tiny blanket, sleeping peacefully. "This," he said, "is someone very important, someone we lost sight of, but never truly forgot." Mama's hand shook as she took the photograph. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in realization. "It can't be," she whispered. "It is," Lwazi said gently. "That baby is Thandi's twin sister. She was adopted shortly after your departure, Ndidi." My mind spun. I stumbled backward, heart racing. "Twin sister? But why didn't you tell us? Why didn't Mama ever say?" Lwazi's eyes softened. "Because some truths must be revealed carefully. You were children when these events unfolded, and some truths, left unspoken, protect hearts from breaking too soon." Thandi's eyes filled with tears. "At a sister? I have a sister." Mama's face was a mixture of guilt, sorrow, and relief. "Yes, Thandi. I had to make choices I thought were right at the time. But the world, it doesn't always allow us to carry our hearts intact." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "So, he's connected to us? To Mama?" "Yes," Lwazi said softly. "I am someone who loved your mother. Someone who lost track of our lives but never stopped caring. And someone who has tried to make amends without revealing the full weight too soon." The courtyard felt suspended in time. I could hear the distant sounds of Johannesburg, the honking taxis, the faint music from a street vendor, children laughing. But here, between Mama, Thandi, and me, the world had shrunk to a single moment. Mama held the handkerchief, her eyes glistening. I thought leaving was protection," she whispered. "But perhaps it was the opposite. Perhaps the truth always finds a way." Lwazi nodded. "Truth does find a way. And now, you must decide what you will do with it, how you will move forward." I glanced at Thandi, her small hand clutching mine. We had grown up in poverty, learning resilience, pride, and perseverance from our mother. Yet this revelation, of a hidden sister, of a man who had loved Mama, of a life interwoven with wealth and secrets, shifted everything. "Mama, what will we do?" I asked, voice trembling. She looked at me with the wisdom only years of sacrifice could bring. "We live," she said softly. "We face the past. We embrace the present. And we choose carefully for the future. Together." Lwazi stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Mama's shoulder. "I never wanted to frighten or pressure you. I only want to offer what I can: guidance, support, family." Mama's lips quivered. "Family, yes. But love and pride, they are tangled." I watched them, sensing the weight of unspoken regrets, and realized that this man, this stranger who had returned with a handkerchief, a box of photographs, and a notebook full of clues, had quietly become a part of our lives. Thandi's voice was small but insistent. "Mama, can we meet her? My sister." Mama's eyes softened. She glanced at Lwazi, then at the photos. "Yes," she said finally, "but we must tread carefully. She is part of a life we cannot rush into. And the past must be honored, not trampled." The rest of the afternoon was spent piecing together fragments of the past. Lwazi shared stories of the time he had watched from afar, of his attempts to protect Mama and the daughters, and of the small ways he had tried to guide our lives without revealing himself. I listened, enraptured, my heart aching for the years of separation, for the choices that had been made in silence, for the family we had almost never become. Mama's voice was quiet, reflective. "I thought leaving was strength," she said. "But strength without love is hollow, and love without courage is incomplete." I realized then that our lives had been shaped not just by poverty or hardship, but by choices made in fear, by secrets kept to protect hearts, and by the quiet hope that someone, somewhere, cared enough to guide us. As the sun dipped low behind the white walls of the courtyard, Lwazi placed a hand gently on Thandi's shoulder. "One day soon," he said softly, "you will meet her. And together, you will understand that family is more than blood. It is presence, care, and love, even when hidden." Mama clutched the handkerchief tightly. "Yes," she whispered, "and we will walk that path, carefully, together." I felt the weight of it all settle in my chest, the mystery, the revelations, the connection to a past we hadn't known. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable, because the shadows had lifted, and in their place the truth, at last, had been revealed. The morning sun had just begun to warm the rooftops of Alexandra township when Mama called us for breakfast. But today, the smell of frying eggs and maize porridge didn't feel ordinary. It carried the strange weight of change, a sense that the world outside our small home was shifting, bending toward something bigger, something new. I watched her from the doorway. She moved with cautious confidence, yet every step seemed deliberate, as though testing herself against an invisible line. The handkerchief lay folded neatly beside her on the table, a silent witness to the morning's stillness. "Ndidi, Thandi," she said, voice steady but softer than usual. "Today we begin to build bridges, not just between past and present, but between worlds, between who we were and who we can become." Thandi's eyes widened, curiosity and excitement battling with trepidation. "Worlds, Mama!" "Yes," Mama replied, her gaze meeting ours. "Some bridges must be crossed carefully, but today we stepped together." Later that morning, we left our narrow streets behind and boarded the taxi to Sandton. I pressed my face to the window, watching the township recede. Dust clouds lingered in the sunlight, children waved from alleyways, and hawkers called out their wares. The city had always been our home, yet today it felt like a small, familiar world poised on the edge of something vast. When we arrived, Lwazi was waiting, leaning against the polished hood of his sleek black car. The sunlight glinted off the chrome, and I felt a twinge of awe. He smiled warmly as Mama approached, and for the first time, I saw her let go, if only slightly, of the fear that had held her so tightly for decades. "Good morning," Lwazi said, bowing slightly to Mama. "And to you, Ndidi. Thandi, are you ready to take the next step?" Mama nodded, her hand tightening around the handkerchief briefly before relaxing. "Yes," she said softly. "We are ready." We walked into a cafe tucked into a quiet corner of Sandton. Sunlight spilled through large windows, illuminating polished tables and chairs, the faint clink of cups and silverware punctuating the gentle hum of conversation. I could feel a strange energy between us, the merging of our past life, humble and chaotic, with this polished, controlled world. Loazi gestured toward a table near the window. "Sit. Let's talk," he said. Mama and I sat. Ndidi perched beside me, fidgeting with excitement. Loazi pulled a small folder from his bag and opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents tracing a life that had been carefully hidden from us, investments Mama had made, opportunities she had passed on, and letters from people she had once known in Sandton, including Loazi's family. "These," Loazi said softly, "are pieces of a life that was never meant to be forgotten. Pieces that connect you, even now, to the world beyond Alexandra, but also pieces that show the strength of your mother and the resilience of both of you." Mama's eyes glistened as she flipped through the pages. I noticed a photograph of our family, taken years ago, tucked behind a page of financial records, a reminder that love and sacrifice had carried us through poverty and hardship, even when the world outside had seemed indifferent. Ndidi finally whispered, "So, he's helping us, not just with money." Mama smiled faintly. "Helping us, yes. But it's more than money, Ndidi. It's guidance, opportunity, and sometimes that is harder to accept than anything else." Loazi nodded. "I want to give you choices. Choices that I never had the courage to offer before. But the bridges we build must be walked together. Carefully, thoughtfully, and with understanding." I felt a lump in my throat. For so long, we had struggled, scraping by, learning resilience in the harsh light of Alexandra. And now, for the first time, a bridge stretched before us, shining, polished, and waiting to be crossed. We spent hours that day talking, laughing, and sharing stories. Loazi revealed small truths about the past, about his life, and about the ways he had tried to protect Mama and us from afar. The cafe around us buzzed with gentle warmth, the sunlight highlighting his expressions, Mama's cautious smiles, and the sisters' wide-eyed curiosity. At one point, Ndidi leaned across the table. "Mama, can we go see her? My sister." Mama paused, her eyes softening. "Soon," she said. "But we must prepare. She has her life, just as you have yours. The bridges we cross must respect that." Loazi reached out, brushing a loose curl from Ndidi's face. "One day they will meet. And when they do, it will be a meeting not just of blood but of hearts." As the afternoon wore on, we left the cafe and walked through the streets of Sandton. I noticed the contrast everywhere, polished streets versus rough alleys, high-rise towers versus small township homes. Yet, in that contrast, I realized something profound. These worlds were not separate. They were connected by choices, by sacrifices, and by love. Mama's hand brushed mine. "Ndidi, remember this," she said softly. "Bridges are not easy to build. They require patience, courage, and humility. But once built, they can carry the weight of generations." I nodded, understanding more than I had ever before. The bridges we were crossing were not just about wealth or opportunity. They were about trust, about forgiveness, and about embracing the fullness of our story, past, present, and future. By evening, we returned to Alexandra. The sun had begun to set, casting golden light across the township rooftops. The air smelled of smoke and cooking fires, and the distant laughter of children echoed through the alleys. I looked at Mama, Ndidi, and even myself, and felt a strange sense of wholeness. Mama held the handkerchief once more, but this time with a different energy, not fear or secrecy, but reverence and hope. "Today," she said softly, "we began to bridge the worlds, and tomorrow we will continue." I realized then that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in my life, I felt that our family, fractured, hidden, and tested by time, could stand united. And as I watched the sun sink behind the Alexandra skyline, I knew that the bridges we built today would carry us toward a future brighter than any past we had endured. Because in the end, worlds may be different, streets may divide, and lives may scatter. But family, true family, is the bridge that connects everything. The morning air in Alexandra was thick with anticipation. Birds called softly from the rooftops, and the distant hum of the township, taxi horns, children playing, vendors shouting, felt different today, sharper, like the world itself was holding its breath. Mama moved quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared breakfast. The handkerchief lay folded neatly on the table, a silent reminder that the past and present were now entwined in ways we could neither ignore nor escape. "Mama," I whispered, "do you think we're ready?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes, usually calm and steady, flickered with uncertainty. "Ready, yes. But trust, that is harder. Trust must be earned, Ndidi. And sometimes the hardest bridge to cross is the one built between hearts, not streets." Thandi leaned against me, sensing the tension. Wazi will help us, right?" Mama's lips pressed into a thin line. "Help can be offered," she said softly. "But acceptance, that is a choice you must make for yourself. And sometimes that choice can hurt more than rejection." Later that morning, we walked towards Sandton again. The streets glittered with sunlight bouncing off high-rise windows, polished cars, and neat sidewalks. I couldn't help but notice how different it felt from our dusty, chaotic township. Yet today, that difference seemed symbolic, a bridge stretching between worlds, waiting to be crossed, but lined with invisible trials. When we reached the courtyard, Wazi was waiting, calm and composed. His presence seemed to command the sunlight itself, bathing the scene in a quiet warmth. He greeted Mama with a respectful nod, then turned to us. "Good morning," he said softly. "Today we take the next step. But it is not just about opportunity, it is about trust. And trust must be tested." Mama's fingers tightened around the handkerchief. "Tested how?" Wazi gestured to a small building at the far end of the courtyard. "Inside is a proposal, something that could change the course of your lives. But I need to see if you are willing to accept guidance, support, and family without fear or pride obstructing the path." Thandi's eyes widened. "Oh, a test? Like a challenge?" "Yes," Wazi said gently. "A test not of strength or intelligence, but of the heart." Mama hesitated at the threshold. "Ndidi, I don't know if we're ready for this. Pride, fear, they are strong." I reached for her hand. "Mama, we've come this far. We can face it. Together." She nodded slowly and we stepped inside. The interior was sleek, filled with polished wood, sunlight streaming through tall windows, and a single table in the center. On it lay documents, photographs, and a small key. Wazi gestured toward them. "This," he said, "represents opportunity, choice, and trust. But you must choose carefully. Read, understand, and decide together." We gathered around the table. The documents outlined scholarships, business opportunities, and small investments that could secure the family's future. But more than that, there were personal letters from Wazi, detailing moments he had observed from afar, ways he had tried to protect us, and offers of guidance without interference. I picked up one of the letters. The handwriting was familiar, precise, and full of care. My eyes welled up. "Mama, he's been protecting us all this time." Mama's lips quivered. "Yes, but protection comes with responsibility. And accepting help can feel like admitting weakness." Thandi whispered, I think we should trust him." I nodded. "I agree. But we need to be careful. Pride doesn't disappear overnight." Wazi watched us carefully, his expression unreadable. "I do not ask blind acceptance. I ask for honesty with yourselves and with each other. You must decide, are you ready to bridge these worlds fully?" Mama exhaled slowly, tension melting slightly from her shoulders. "We are ready," she said, voice firm but gentle. "We may falter, but together we will try." And in that moment, I felt something shift, a subtle, profound change. The fear that had haunted us, the pride that had restrained us, began to loosen. The handkerchief, the note, the photographs, they were no longer just reminders of the past. They were symbols of choice, of courage, and of the future we could build. Wazi smiled, a faint glimmer of relief crossing his features. "Then the next step is yours. Take what is offered, explore what you can, and decide how your lives will be shaped. But remember, these opportunities are bridges, not cages. They exist to carry you, not to bind you." I glanced at Mama. Her eyes were moist, but determined. "Ndidi, we must walk carefully. Together." with hearts open and minds aware. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me. Ndidi squeezed my hand, her small fingers trembling with excitement and fear. Together, she whispered. The next few hours were a delicate dance of exploration, discussion, and quiet reflection. We reviewed every document, examined every opportunity, and asked every question we could think of. Lwazi provided guidance, but never imposed. He watched, waited, and let us make the choices ourselves. And with every decision, I could feel our hearts and minds bridging gaps we had never imagined possible. Pride softened, fear receded, and hope fragile, tentative hope began to grow. Mama finally folded the handkerchief and placed it carefully in her bag. We have passed the first test, she said softly, not because we accepted help, but because we trusted ourselves enough to consider it. And in doing so, we honor the past while embracing the future. As we stepped outside, the afternoon sun warmed the courtyard, casting long shadows that stretched toward the city. I realized then that the bridges we were building were not just for wealth, opportunity, or connections. They were bridges between hearts. Our hearts, Mama's heart, Ndidi's heart, and even Lwazi's. We walked slowly through the streets of Sandton, the contrast between polished city and chaotic township glaring yet harmonious. Each step felt like a promise, a choice, a bridge being built beneath our feet. Ndidi looked up at me. Do you think we'll be able to meet her soon? Mama smiled faintly. Soon, but only when hearts are ready. And today, our hearts have taken the first true steps. I glanced at the handkerchief tucked in Mama's bag, thinking of all it had carried. Secrets, love, guidance, and now trust. It was more than cloth. It was a symbol of courage, a token of family, and a bridge across worlds we had once thought were impossible to cross. And I knew, deep in my chest, that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also the promise of reunion, understanding, and the full circle of a story that had begun decades ago. Because the test of trust was passed, and soon the final pieces of our family, scattered by time and circumstance, would come together. The morning sun bathed Alexandra in gold, dust motes dancing lazily in the warm light. There was an electricity in the air, a quiet hum of anticipation that made my heart race. Today was the day we would finally meet her. Ndidi's sister, the missing piece of our family, was waiting. And I could feel it. The past and present, the shadowed streets of our childhood and the polished avenues of Sandton were finally converging. Mama moved with quiet determination, the handkerchief tucked into her blouse like a talisman. For the first time in years, I saw a calmness in her eyes, a fragile hope that made her beautiful in ways the hardships of life had never allowed before. Ndidi, Ndidi, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Remember, hearts must be open. Fear, pride, they can cloud everything. Today we step fully into the circle of our family. Together. I nodded, gripping Ndidi's hand. Her small fingers trembled in mine. Anticipation mingled with the nervous energy that had carried us through every challenge of our lives. We drove to a small, sunlit home tucked in a quiet suburb. Lwazi sat beside us, calm and reassuring, yet there was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. She's been waiting, he said quietly. She's been ready, and now so are you. Mama exhaled deeply, as if releasing decades of fear and guilt. It's time, she whispered. It's time to heal. When we reached the front door, I could feel my pulse in my throat. The door opened slowly, and there she stood, a young woman, her eyes wide with emotion, framed by dark, glossy curls. She wore a simple dress, but there was a quiet elegance about her, a presence that immediately felt familiar, though foreign. Ndidi gasped, stumbling forward. Sister! The woman's eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer. Ndidi! In that instant, years of separation, loss, and longing melted into one powerful, undeniable moment. Ndidi threw herself into her sister's arms, sobbing softly. I stood beside them, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by the completeness of it all. Mama watched silently, the handkerchief clutched in her hands. When she finally stepped forward, Lwazi smiled gently, giving her space to reconnect. Mama, the young woman said softly, voice trembling, I've waited so long to meet you. Mama's eyes glistened. And I've carried the weight of your absence every day. She knelt slightly, embracing her lost daughter as if to make up for decades of missed hugs, birthdays, and quiet moments that had never been shared. I watched the reunion, feeling a strange, almost magical pull, the full circle of our family, intertwined with love, sacrifice, and redemption. Lwazi stood beside us, a quiet guardian of these moments, letting us take the space we needed, his presence a stabilizing force rather than a disruption. Thandi's sister stepped back slightly, holding both of our hands. I can't believe we're really here. Together. Yes, Mama whispered. Together. And now, nothing can break the circle. The afternoon was spent in laughter, stories, and tears, an emotional symphony that filled every corner of the small home. We shared memories, old and new, bridging the years we had been apart. Thandi's sister spoke of her childhood, her adoptive family, and the moments she had felt our presence without knowing it. I realized then that the bridges we had built, from Alexandra to Sandton, from past secrets to present trust, were stronger than any fear or pride. They carried more than wealth, guidance, or opportunity. They carried love, and that love was enough to heal even decades of separation. Lwazi finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. This is what I wanted for all of you. Not just safety or success, but completeness. A family reunited, hearts open, trust restored. Mama nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. Yes, and it is more than I ever hoped for. You helped us, even when we didn't understand how. Thandi's sister smiled, tears still wet on her cheeks. I feel whole. I feel home. And in that moment, I felt it too. Home. Not just a place, but a feeling. A warmth, a bond. A circle that no distance, no secrets, and no years could break. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the courtyard, we stood together outside, holding hands, laughing softly, and feeling the weight of the past lift. The handkerchief, now folded neatly in Mama's bag, had served its purpose. It had guided us, carried secrets, and led us to this moment. I looked at Lwazi, and for the first time, I understood the quiet depth of his love. It wasn't about wealth, or power, or control. It was about connection, about family, about making amends in ways that only patience and courage could allow. Mama, I whispered, we made it. We crossed the bridges. Yes, she said softly, looking at all of us. And we will continue to walk them together. Thandi tugged at her sister's hand. Promise me, we'll never be apart again. I promise, her sister said, hugging her tightly. And there it was, the full circle, complete and undeniable. The poverty and pride, the secrets and sacrifices, the challenges and the courage, all converged in a single, perfect moment. Night fell over Johannesburg, the city lights twinkling like scattered stars. From the small courtyard, I could see both the polished streets of Sandton and the dusty rooftops of Alexandra, side by side, connected not by roads but by family, trust, and love. Mama held the handkerchief one last time, pressing it to her chest. We've come full circle, she whispered. And now we begin a new chapter, one built on truth, courage, and love. I stood beside her, Thandi beside me, her sister beside her, and I realized that this story, our story, had reached its emotional home. The past had been honored, the present embraced, and the future full of possibility. Because family, I understood finally, was the bridge across every world, every shadow, every secret. And in that circle, we were whole.